We've all seen by now the Air Jordan-like moment Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton had to live through after his lap 1 tussle with former teammate, now current Alpine driver Fernando Alonso. We've also heard now what Alonso had to say about Lewis during the heat of the moment, and it isn't too much of a surprise, I would say, that Alonso doesn't have many nice things to say to him. But what we haven't heard yet is just how much damage did the incident cause both Lewis Hamilton and his W13. Will he have to take a gearbox penalty? Did Lewis get hurt after the incident? Well, let's talk about it then. But before we do, consider subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss out on our latest uploads. Now, let's get started, shall we? Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton first crossed paths at McLaren in 2007, when Lewis Hamilton first came into the sport. And the battle that ensued between the two that season was a sight to behold. And although the two ended the year with an equal number of points in the drivers' standings, it is safe to say that the fact that a rookie like Lewis was at the time able to push a 2-time world champion like Fernando was very intriguing to watch. Since then, every time the two would be side by side on the track, then it was must-watch TV. And this past weekend at the Belgian Grand Prix was no difference, to say the least, as we saw Hamilton's W13 fly through the air after jockeying with Alonso at Le Combe at the opening lap of the race. Much to everyone's surprise, Hamilton would take the blame for the incident, and that he was truly apologetic to both Fernando and the team for costing them a good chunk of points. And now, in a recent interview, Lewis has revealed that he feared he would come out of the incident with an injury due to how high he thought he was in the air and how hard the impact was. In Lewis's words, "Well, yeah, I almost broke my back coming down, so it's a big hit. I just remember looking at the ground, so it was quite high. It was definitely high up. I'm grateful to be still alive and in shape. I could hear something was broken in the gearbox, so yeah, I mean, coming down I would have broken so much in the back end, so I was told to stop. But obviously, in that moment, you're hopeful that you can keep going. But yeah, not meant to be." And while Lewis was able to walk out of the incident relatively unscathed, the same would not be said for his W13 and its power unit, who have told the media that the team has been shipped back to Brixworth for examination and has called its state definitely a concern. Hamilton reportedly has only used 2 power units thus far before the Belgian Grand Prix, where he had first used his 3rd power unit of the year. So the likely damaged power unit was almost brand new and was expected to be Hamilton's last power unit for the season. The possible loss of his 3rd power unit from the pool he's allowed to use will be costly to him and the team. And to add to that, Hamilton is also on the usage limit of his final MGU-K, Turbo, MGU-H, control electronics, and energy store. So further replacements of those components will also mean grid penalties as well. Hamilton's gearbox also took a hard hit after the landing, and it has been reported that the carrier was cracked after the incident. And to add to the damages, the internals are also being subjected to damage inspection to know whether or not they're still usable. If not, the team will have to take a 3rd set at the Dutch Grand Prix, which, to the team's relief, will not cause any penalties. Now, after a costly accident and the threat of injuring one of his drivers, team boss Toto Wolff would take matters into his own hands and speak for Lewis in response to the unpleasant words Fernando had to say on his team radio about Lewis during the accident, that to his surprise was broadcast on live TV. And if surprisingly you still don't know by now what Fernando said, the Alpine driver shouted into his team radio during the heat of the moment, "What an idiot, closing the door from the outside. I mean, we had a mega start, but this guy only knows how to drive and start in first." Definitely unpleasant, am I right? Anyway, Toto would take the liberty of defending Lewis by saying to the media, "Well, Lewis has started in the front a lot. He's won 7 world championships, so the strategy worked." Hamilton's retirement from the race capped off a weekend to forget for the Silver Arrows that up to that point struggled to find pace both in the practice sessions and the qualifying session on Saturday, which Toto had described as the worst qualifying session he's ever been a part of. But F1 teams have two drivers for a reason, and to give credit where credit is due, even with a lackluster setup that definitely did not fit what the track required to be fast, George Russell was able to hold off Ferrari's Charles Leclerc throughout the race, and was on the brink of possibly taking on Carlos during the latter stages of the race, if not for the two scrappy laps, as George would call them. This has led the young British driver to believe that their race pace was a silver lining to their dismal weekend in Belgium. In his words, a little bit of mixed feelings right now, because if you had told me last night we would be 2 seconds off the podium on merit and pure pace, I'd have probably said, yeah, that's a good recovery. When I was closing in at a second lap, I thought, here we go, we're in for a really good shot here. And then I just had 2 really scrappy laps and got the tires out of the window. Unfortunately, in Formula 1, tires seem to be the only thing we ever talk about, and when you're in that sweet spot, the car is just transformed. As soon as I lost it, I knew that was really game over for the podium. But nevertheless, P4, 2 seconds off the podium, not too bad. I think definitely today our race pace was really better than the Ferraris. Carlos was leading the first stint and we closed him in both times. So at worst, I think we are equal with Ferrari today. But as we know, it swings and roundabouts. But what is clear is Max is kind of cruising away. But even with George seeing the few bright spots for the team this past weekend, Toto has been the complete opposite and says that the team is stuck in the dungeon, as the team is still struggling to understand their W13. In his words, they say you never lose, you learn. I can tell you it is f***ing difficult. All these nice Instagram posts and everything we've talked about over the 8 years about how we're going to take this when you arrive in the dungeon, to stick to your principles and your values, to keep the spirit up and continue to relentlessly seek to get better. Phew. There is more to write a book about this year than there is about the last 8 years. It's very difficult to cope with these swings. We had a totally subpar performance in qualifying. Then in the race, sometimes we go 3 seconds a lap faster. There are big question marks about what is going on. It's not where we should be with the structure and knowledge to understand a racing car, but we don't with this one. And there you have it, guys. So, did you think Alonso's comments were warranted? Did Lewis do a good job of handling the incident? Was Toto right for speaking up for Lewis? Let us know in the comments section below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't.